Hello and welcome to another episode of Getting Your Ducks in a Row. Today I'm joined by Brian Murphy, aka BrianSpecMan. Brian is a writer, lecturer and creator of a number of sustainable building calculators. His mission, to drag the built environment away from business as usual and into a low carbon, high performance future. We talk about the hard truths around building regs, the planning system and the commercial realities that hold the industry back. We also explore real practical solutions that can help the industry do better and make smarter, more sustainable decisions. Let's get into it. Morning, Brian. Welcome to the show.
Morning, Jason. It's very nice to have the opportunity to speak to a different audience, I guess.
Yes. I mean, it's. I've been looking forward to this one. We met at Future Build and sort of coming, operating in a similar sort of industry, but two very different parts of the industry. And it was really interesting to get some insights into what you do. And I'm really pleased that you accepted our invitation to join, because I think there's a hell of a lot of insight and value that you can add to our listeners. And I'm really looking forward to chatting with you.
Yeah, thank you. It's nice to kind of bump into people at the exhibitions that you're not expecting, and to kind of have something completely different come out of it, rather than just learning about materials and technology. So fantastic. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. If we just start off, Brian, if you could just give our listeners a bit of an idea for your sort of journey, your career and your journey in the industry, where you started and then where it sort of led you to today, and what your sort of day-to-day is.
Yeah. So I started out by training as a architectural technician, and doing part-time ONC, HNC, and then went on to study architecture part-time, degree and diploma at North London Poly, and under Peter Rich and Robin Nicholson and a few others, of course. And towards the end of the course, realised that although I was one of the kind of, I suppose, top 10 of the students in terms of design, it wasn't where my brain was. I'm much more interested in materials and technology and science and materials and stuff like that. So, and I'm not a philosopher, and I just haven't got time for the philosophical, bullshitty kind of part of the architectural education process. My first commission came because at one of our kind of end of year parties, one of the students asked me, what are you going to do in your life? And I said, well, I quite fancy doing specification writing, which, is the kind of the bit that architects hate. It's the boring bit. But for me, it's the most important part of making a building be what you want it to be. Make sure it's competent and effective, and just using all the right materials, and materials that like each other, not react with each other. And so I got an email from that student, Nick Guy, saying, have you seen the advert in BD? And it was an advert for a specification writer for the New British Library. So that became my first freelance commission, which was 7 years, about 8 years when you add the completion phase, on site, mostly full time there, initially 14 hours just as a kind of test run. And then I did virtually all of the building fabric and fit out specifications. So that's where it started. And at that point, there was a choice to use Afromosia and stain it black and put 4 coats of acid catalyst lacquer on it. So it felt like plastic, it looked like plastic, and it was an endangered species because Friends of the Earth had just published information that year. I raised the question, and it was sort of, oh, who are you to ask questions like that of architects taught at Cambridge? And I thought, well, I've got to do something about that. And so my ambition then was to build a green building encyclopedia. It took a long time to get my act together to do that. But then at the turn of the century, I said, okay, I've got to do something, and started out with GreenSpec website. And eventually decided I had to move on from that because it was limiting what I wanted to do. And in the meantime, I'd been kind of doing CPD seminars all over the place, mostly to educate the team that I was working with. I'm writing specifications and they don't understand the building technology. So I started running CPD seminars to try and get them up to speed and teach them about specification writing processes. And I attended an exhibition recently where one of the other exhibitors was one of my ex-colleagues, and she said, I learned so much from you from that stuff about specifications, performance specification, prescriptive specification, and now I practice it in my own business. So, little things like that help to kind of get the industry kind of aligned, and then I started adding the green flavor to everything I did. And so for 25 years, I've been in the environmental arena, if you like. And I don't use the term sustainability because nobody knows what it means. I have my own definition, which is heresy: healthy, environmental, resourceful, appropriate, competent, effective. If you're doing all of those things, you're probably doing something sustainable. And so I've been learning and disseminating for 25 years on environmental construction and materials and methods. And then I was doing a fair number of years at university lecturing, and I was given this task to get students up to speed with embodied energy, embodied carbon, and in-use energy, in-use carbon. And so I started with a series of, I think it was 20 seminars. So I had 19 homeworks, and I could get them to I would build a calculator and they would populate it with their current studio design. And then we had a whole set of buildings of completely different types and all of their data, so that we could actually do some comparisons and people could learn stuff from it. And it became an educational tool. And then one of my students and I met one day. He wanted some advice for some work that he was doing in his own practice. And we had this conversation. It was the day before COVID was announced. And he said to me, those the calculators, all the part-time students took it back to their office and were using it in the real world. And I said, oh, this is interesting. Okay. So COVID was announced the following day, and I thought, okay, I've got a couple of months. I can merge those calculators and do something useful with them, get it out there as a tool for other people. That took 2 years. 2 years to build a new build calculator, because I was merging the two existing calculators and then adding a bill of quantities and adding the LCA life cycle assessment, environmental product declaration, and other calculations like condensation, increment delay, because overheating is progressively going to become a bigger and bigger problem. It's already affecting 25% of housing. Overheating is going to significantly cause more problems in the future, because Part O of the building regs doesn't understand that we gain heat through opaque fabric. It's not just coming in through the windows, it comes in through the roof and through the walls. So I've been building calculators. I've written a probably about 150-page report on, it's not a report, it's a kind of design guide on how to prevent overheating. And it's fairly well illustrated, and it's published on Green Building Encyclopedia website. So Green Building Encyclopedia website came about after GreenSpec website, where I just needed to have a way of disseminating more of what I did. I had written over 1,000 hours of CPD material on environmental construction, and I wanted that up on the website, and it wasn't going up on GreenSpec, so I had to build a new website. So I did. And now with the calculators, I've got another website, which is greenbuildingcalculator.uk. And I'm currently working on a number of bespoke versions of it. I'm doing a historic carbon calculator for historic building fabric with a European funded project, Kaleshe, and also building a glazing carbon calculator for a vacuum glazing manufacturer. And yesterday I was doing a transport emissions calculator for products coming from China compared with products coming from Belgium. We haven't got the answer to the figures yet, but I've built the calculator and I'm waiting for the data. Once I've got the data, then we can do the number crunching, and then we'll have some answers. And then I'll have a tool which I can publish independently, which allows people to do those calculations, because everyone's saying, oh, well, it's coming from China, so it's not good. Well, it's not always bad if it's been transported on a ship. But then you have to think about, how did it get to the coast, and how does it get from the coast to where it gets installed. So all of those things matter. So it's got all of the transport options, it's got all of the consolidation center options, and when it's coming from Belgium, it's probably coming by truck or train, and it might come all the way in the one truck, but I don't know yet. So once we've got that data, then we can kind of do proper comparisons. Um, I have a few other calculators sort of brewing in various stages of development. So I'm doing stuff that needs to be done. I'm doing stuff that is useful for people in their kind of daily life.
I think just on the calculators, how one goes about compiling all of the different components together, all of the relevant sort of information you need, and then puts in place a process that allows it to calculate all of those things and give you the result that you're looking for. I mean, how do you even start thinking about that and going about building something like that?
Well, that you start with U-value calculation, but in fact, before that, you go to your regulations or design standards or campaign targets and set your U-values. But if you also check your form factor, so the shape of the building, if it's got lots of wings and arms, it's going to have a lot of external envelope compared to the floor area. So you do a form factor calculation. And if it's got dormers and conservatories and porches, that adds to the form factor. So those are separate worksheets within the calculator, so that it's doing all the things that you need to do. I've spent the time building the calculator. It took 2 years to build the new build calculator, so that you have less to do as a user. And then you get down to the U-value calculation, where every component of every element of the building has its own line. You choose a material in that line for, let's say, for the air tightness barrier. Then you'll choose a material. It then populates the spreadsheet with numbers so that the calculations are already beginning to happen. Once you've assembled the whole wall, you know what the R value is, you know what the U value is, and it will then say, have you met your target, i.e. the building regs or the design standards or others? And if you haven't, go back and review the thicknesses of the insulation. It also gives you the opportunity to understand the relative quantities of energy that are coming out of the different elements of the building. So it will highlight, for example, that 5% of your external envelope is spewing out 50% of the energy, and that's the windows. So you know that's where to spend money, and it gives you the tools to argue with your client. This is where you need to spend money, not on a bathroom, not on fancy ironmongery or taps, on insulation or better windows. So that's a kind of primary bit.
And how are you seeing the industry sort of generally? What's the uptake like for these types of tools? Because, you know, you mentioned earlier when you were speaking about your career about the term sustainability and perhaps it being too broad a term. And you know, I think that scares a lot of people. And I think people, whilst the drive is there to be more sustainable as a business, lower your carbon footprint, et cetera, in my experience, it's often something that scares people and they're not quite sure how to go about it. But access to tools like this make that transition seem a lot easier. And I'm just curious as to how the industry is taking this sort of thing up and whether it's being used to its full potential.
Yeah, 25 years ago, I used to say there are about 2,000 people who care and who are trying to do something about it. There are significantly larger numbers. And, you know, when Greta invited the adults to come and join the students in the global strikes, then all of a sudden an awful lot of people appeared who wanted to be part of this new, you know, you can't fix an existing industry that doesn't work. You have to build a new one. So there's a whole raft of new people who are kind of engaging with the stuff that matters. The challenge with the vast majority of the industry, and I still see it when I do a CPD seminar, I go into an architect's office where they are the technical architects or executive architects after the design architects have done their thing. So they design something, and then it gets novated to a contractor, and then the designers for the contractor then start to work on substituting and reducing. If there's a performance spec, they'll find the cheapest and easiest way to make that construction meet those targets. And they're not in a position to do environmental. And I'm just thinking, well, I'd give up if that was the case. I would go off and do something else, because you're having no effect whatsoever. And there's a significant number of people who don't think there's an issue that they can engage with or address. And the challenge with architectural education is that they're focused on philosophical stuff and not real stuff. They're not focusing on the performance of the building, the science of the materials, the number crunching. Students come up to me at the exhibitions and say, is it an app? Is it an app? I say, no, it's Excel. What's Excel? And you think, well, what the hell are they being taught at university if they don't even know what Excel is? That's something that you use every day of the week to kind of do little bits of number crunching. So there's a significant number of people who are not engaged and won't ever be engaged. But there's a growing number of people who are robustly doing their bit and trying their hardest and producing publications and challenging government. And, all of these things matter because every single thing has to happen. Embodied energy, the building regs approved document O sorry, I don't mean O, I mean Z. O is for overheating, which doesn't work. And then Z, as proposed by the industry to government, the government's response was copyright infringement. You've used our imagery, rather than, oh, that's something we need to engage with properly. So there's a challenge, and until the government make embodied energy embodied carbon a criteria for competency and design and regulations, then an awful lot of people are not going to engage. So what I'm trying to do is make it very easy for architects and others to engage with the subject in advance of the regulations eventually turning up, because there's so many other countries that are already doing it, already legislation. So we've got to kind of get ready for it. There's plenty of people who are doing it. And even the RICS, who've got their design, their standards, their professional standards for their professionals, their surveyors, are making embodied energy, embodied carbon, sequestered carbon more complicated, so that you end up, LCA and life cycle assessment and environmental product declarations. It's so, the figures, the numbers that come out, the tables of information are microscopic numbers against subjects that nobody understands. What is eutrophication? How do you affect that? How do you choose a material that has low eutrophication? You have to read an EPD to find, and you have to read a lot in order to see, that's got a lot of eutrophication, that's got a less, and when the figures are, I think it's 156 bits of information in an EPD, and they're microscopic numbers that mean nothing to anybody. So it's not enormously helpful, and you have to then look at whole building calculations with all of the component parts, all the material choices, in order to be able to kind of make anything of it.
And I think you just mentioning that there, Brian, I think there's also the commercial reality to that, right? When you're running these projects or whatever it is you're doing, it's having the time and resources available to be able to digest this information to make the right choice. But ultimately, we're all under pressure to deliver the work that we need to deliver. And sometimes it's just not commercially viable to put that amount of thought and time into something like that, even though it's all for the best cause. Sometimes the day-to-day of it just makes something like that impossible.
I've realized that the calculators are cumbersome. I've done everything I can to make them as simple as possible, but inevitably it's complicated. So what I've done is I've got in my head that there are other things that need to be done, and other people have started to do it. There is a diagram that's going about, which is this triangle of all these different materials and all of their environmental impacts. And the best materials are at the top of the triangle and the worst at the bottom. So that kind of graphic, easy to understand, is important. And I've already got 892 ready-made elemental assemblies from a tool that we built on GreenSpec website, but then that got abandoned. So I still have the data. I can turn them into more calculations so that you can see 892 ready-made elemental assemblies and their environmental impacts instantaneously. Pick and choose the higher and lower. And by using conditional formatting, you can highlight the low impact materials very easily. But we all know that if we start using bio-based materials, timber and bio-based thermal insulation, natural materials, stone, earth, and other things, we know that we're going to produce lower carbon buildings, lower energy buildings. And there's a significant number of people who are trying to do that. But the RICS system actually makes it more complicated and more challenging to engage with sequestered carbon. So, it puts people off. But in reality, we've got to do more timber building, and we've got to use more natural plant-based insulation materials instead of the petrochemicals, which have been pushed hard by all of the kind of industries that, business as usual industries.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think that's a great point. I think the way that the industry has always operated, and now there's this very steep learning curve that is being introduced because it's a necessity, i.e. to use more sustainable materials, to change the way that people are working, the way your projects are run, etc. Put more time and into researching what would be a better alternative. And I think that there's quite a steep learning curve there, which, human beings notoriously can be quite resistant to change. And I think that if you can sort of help improve that learning curve with the type of things and initiatives that you're doing, which will help people get to that answer a bit quicker, not make it so daunting to establish what a better alternative would be, that's only going to help. But I wonder what are your thoughts on the next generation of people that are coming through this type of these calculators, these tools, these sort of initiatives that you're driving towards now? They presumably, the only way we're going to help people make better decisions and it not be such a daunting change, and to enact real change in the industry, I think, is to teach it at school level, right? People that are coming through,
yes.
So that the way they're working, as they then transition into a full-time career in the industry, they already have these processes. They've already learned, these things that will help them in their day-to-day work.
Yeah. I give lectures on materials and methods and all the rest of it, and I've written 1,000 hours of CPD material on environmental construction, specification, procurement, and a raft of other things. My material is predominantly on my laptop. It needs to be on the website. I've got 2,500 pages on the website, Green Building Encyclopedia. But that's out of 30,000 pages that I ought to have up there. But it's, not having enough time to kind of process and get things up, and not having the income to be able to kind of dedicate some time to it. Education definitely needs a kick up the arse. The RIBA and the ARB have only recently, after Grenfell, begun to realise that they've got to do something. But the statements that I've seen coming out of them is, we'll look at carbon and we'll look at what was the other one? Carbon, fire, and accessibility or something. And I just think to myself, buildings do an awful lot more than just those things. And when I'm invited to come and talk about carbon to a university, I say, well, I've got the material, I can do the presentation, I can talk about the subject, I can get the kids excited about it. Are you going to pay me? Oh, well, I'll go and find out. And then 2 days later, I get no, we're not going to pay you. You're doing this as a voluntary thing for the education of the future generation. And I'm thinking, my God, a long time ago, I did a little bit of number crunching, and the students were paying for my 20 lectures, something like, they pay whatever it is, $9,000 a year or something. And of that, 0.1% was coming to me as a fee for those lectures. And I just think to myself, this is bloody disgusting. And the whole business that post Grenfell, the architectural education has been about awareness and not about competency. And now we are going to have to be competent, or the new body, the new version of the health and safety executive that's running the building regs are going to be questioning the professions if they see they're just not up to par. And there's a body. I attended a seminar up in Leeds where they were talking about the kind of the tsunami that's coming, and well, that's my term, not theirs. And they were saying that there is this body that is monitoring the professions and the industry and looking for weaknesses and reporting to the HSE. So and I said, are you going to have any teeth? Because otherwise, what's the point? And they said, yes, we've got teeth because the HSE have got teeth.
Right.
And they will come knocking on the door of the ARB and the RIBA and say, come on, education's got to be better than this. You know, and the number of people that I speak to, particularly students, who say, oh my God, architectural education, it's you know, they're telling us, don't try and draw something that's buildable, draw something that's going to be good in the exhibition. I just think, what the? And I remember once I wasn't invited to the RIBA critique of the course, but I was told the day after that one of the RIBA critique people said, what's the point of doing a section through a building? What are they going to learn from that? A bit of insulation and a bit of this and a bit of that. And I thought to myself, you know, you are asking for us to be totally and utterly incompetent to go and have a career with no practical knowledge, and to say a 1 to 50 section through a building is of no value. I mean, they deserve shooting. Had I been there, I probably would have hit him, but I wasn't, thank goodness.
The point you raised there as well, and I mean, it sort of goes back to what we were discussing earlier about the commercial realities that pile on pressure, and you're trying to balance that with building things that are sustainable, safe, etc., and meeting various regulation. And I wonder how. I mean, this is a topic that's been sort of heavily discussed recently in the industry, and I mean, I've heard people call it a laughingstock. But you know, the government's announcement in November about 1.5 million houses by 2030 or 2029 to address our housing crisis, and I just wonder, which I see as a commercial reality, that there is this target and the industry, you know, needs to meet this target to address a problem. And I just wonder how that fits into an industry that is already being sort of whacked with a stick because it's not sustainable, it's carbon hungry, etc., etc. Grenfell regulation, safety. How does that fit in? Like, how does that sort of pressure on an industry then fit into everything else that's going on, where we're trying to be more sustainable, we're trying to be safer, we have various regulations to meet now? I'm just not sure how the two marry up. I feel like something has to give. And I just don't think that the targets on either side are achievable, sort of running side by side.
There's about 6 topics in that question, so I'll try and tackle them.
Try and break it down for us, Brian.
Yeah. So first of all, quantity surveying profession. I call it a trade because I'm not that convinced. Have this preoccupation with cheap everything, and they drive everything that we do from the beginning of the project to the end towards cheapness. Now, you've got a client who wants to build something that's competent for his business. And what we build them as an industry is something that's regulation minimum. And then we're also being driven by various design standards like BRIAM and other things to produce, and sometimes it's through planning processes and building regs processes, we're expected to add all of these extra green things to the recipe. But the price is based on Violet price books. Violet price books are based on building regs legal minimum. And then we don't even build to that because we build 20% below par because of the enormous performance gap between, you know, the design and the actual performance of the building. And the building regs doesn't help because it's saying, you know, air tightness levels of 8 and 5, and you know, we're just squandering energy. You know, that's just one side of it. If you want to build 1.5 million properties, you don't ask the construction industry with its speculative housing developers to do it for you, because they are only interested in profits, and they will slow everything down as much as they possibly can to maximize their profits. They're already working at whatever it is, 20-30% profit margins. If you want the industry to change and you want to produce those properties, you've got to stop investing in those companies and start investing in the industries that are currently failing. And that's all of the MMC manufacturing, because government wants to go MMC route, modern methods construction route. But those industries have no way to get the land and get the planning permissions because they are crowded out by the speculative housing developers. They cannot break into that market. They cannot get their share of that percentage. And so they're working on microscopic margins. And so they're all going bankrupt because they've had this enormous investment over the last 5-10 years to build the factories, but they've got no way of building because they've got no customers, because the customers just carry on with bricks and mortar and laborers who are in their supply chain and under their thumb. So, nothing changes. So government aren't going to build 1.5 million properties unless they completely change the way they do things. And unfortunately, they don't do joined up thinking very well. So, we're stuck there. That's probably only covered a microscopic part of that question, but
no, it's you've broken that down very well, Brian, because it is a very complicated equation, I think. And the answer that the common theme that I get from people when I ask that type of question is that the government, that there's a need for reform. I mean, you've got planning regs as well that are all sort of peppered throughout this, right? That are a constant barrier.
That was one of the other issues that I need to address, and that is permitted development can lead to all kinds of nasty things. The permitted development to build 2 stories on top of an existing building. The existing building can only take an additional X weight. So you build lightweight construction on the top and then clad it in lightweight metal, and then they overheat. So you stick in air conditioning. So, we never solve anything intelligently. We have to do a bit more joined up thinking. The number of times you see those extra 2 stories being added on. So that's that. And then there are other kinds of forms of permitted development that kind of send us off in wrong targets. And if you're going to build 1.5 million properties, they've got to be done sustainably. They've got to be done with a building regs part O and a part Z, but an intelligent part O that understands that buildings overheat through building fabric, not just through windows and some of the publications. There was one publication from the BRE that said all of the overheating is caused by heat from inside going up to the attic. Well, in fact, the images that they were showing were daytime infrared thermography showing the sun cast on the roof of the buildings, and you could see the shadows down the side of the building. And it's the sun that overheats the attic. And we all know if you go up in the attic in the summer, it's like a bloody oven, isn't it? That's where the heat comes from, and it comes through your insulation and warms up the top floor. And so, and they don't understand why top floors of buildings don't overheat and south sides of buildings overheat, because that's where the sun's coming from.
As I say, Brian, the themes that we're talking about here are quite common, I think, and I think there are sort of in various different sectors. We're speaking to quite a few sort of different specialisms within our industry, and the things we're talking about here, they're common themes. And I think I was speaking to an architect recently about sort of planning reform and how the government needs to look at the resources that are being spent and how applications and various other sort of admin, like, if you like, are being managed. And I think there's a real need to look at what we're doing from a holistic perspective. And I think there's a lot of organisation that needs to happen, but this is a problem with all public bodies, right? And with government at the helm, giving us these targets to meet with 1.5 million properties without the infrastructure surrounding it to do it sustainably and efficiently and safely, just makes the architects, anyone in our industry, architects, contractors, engineers, it makes our job impossible. And I just, yeah, I think your insight is very valuable into that, and it's going to be interesting to see how all of this pans out. I think we all know how it's going to pan out, and it's going to be a bit of a shambles. But I think sometimes you just have to sort of amble your way through it.
Yeah, I mean, I attended the Good Homes Alliance annual conference recently, and a guy from I think it was Thames Water, who's an Australian, interestingly, who came over to say, "Look, I've seen what happens when we have droughts. I don't want that to happen in the UK, so I've come here to try and help you make sure you don't get there." And housing developments are being held up because they cannot get the water supply to a site. It's not that they don't want to, or it's going to take time or anything like that. They cannot deliver sufficient water. So what we were talking about 25 years ago and longer was about rainwater harvesting, water recycling, using grey water for different purposes. It's now kind of an essential part of any development. If you're not doing water saving, water recycling, and water reusing, you ain't going to get developing. So, people have just got to start engaging robustly with all of the environmental impact and issues, or you don't get to develop. And the modern method of construction challenge is that they're talking about changing their recipe of steel. I'm thinking, no, you've got to go to timber, and changing their grades of expanded polystyrene or extruded plastics. No, you've got to move to bio-based materials. You've got to significantly change. And this is one of the things about the cradle to cradle thing, is there's a diminishing return on chasing efficiency. You spend an awful lot of money to get a very small return. You have to radically change to get significant changes in your material choices and your environmental impacts as a consequence of those material choices. It's about effectiveness, not efficiency, and it's looking for radical changes. And modern method of construction, if we carry on with business as usual, it's going to have thermal bridges, it's going to have air conditioning requirements, it's going to have overheating problems, all kinds of things that are not being addressed because business as usual just refines and refines instead of radically changes. So, big challenges for the industry to kind of switch, and you need to build the second industry in parallel with the first one, whilst the first one shrinks and disappears.
Yeah, I think also as well, you mentioned there about the need for change, which we've discussed. And what I see is there are a lot of people within the industry that are doing their bit, that are trying to educate everyone else about what's better and alternatives, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's certainly a want and a desire from people within the industry to initiate change. But would you say that there's perhaps not enough of that coming from, the people in power, shall we say, that need to push this initiative, and also make developers and other people involved in the construction of these properties accountable for their processes and what they're doing?
Yeah, I think, when the Environmental Audit Commission or Committee, can't remember what they're called, did a public consultation, there was a kind of a big movement, and I think it started with ACAN, Architects Climate Action Network or Carbon Action Network, who started emailing everybody they knew and all of their members to say, there's this public consultation, for God's sake, please respond, make sure that you've done your thing, and then sent out reminders. And so that was a really powerful kind of move on the part of industry, to kind of get things moving and get government listening. In the feedback, they collect all of the comments, and then they republish the comments so people can see what was said. Everyone was saying we need Part Z, and one developer saying no, we don't. Historically it was 10 developers saying no, we don't, and nobody else saying anything. So the government were given this opportunity to hear the industry wants change, because it's only legislation that changes specifications.
Yeah.
And until we've got the legislation, nothing happens, and it's business as usual. And we're not We're not helping clients to invest in their business, invest in their building. We're just helping them to make things cheap. And cheap doesn't mean good performance. And, we've got to move towards passive house levels of energy performance and air tightness and thermal bridge resistance, thermal breaks and the like, or we're just going to carry on with business as usual and nothing happens. And we've got to switch from concrete and cement and steel and brick and start moving towards timber-based and plant-based insulation and other materials. And we've got to, radically change that. And RACS have got to make life easier for us to seriously engage with carbon sequestration, because it's just too complicated. And people are being put off choosing timber-based construction because it's complicated, rather than doing it anyway. And there's a significant number of people who are doing it anyway because they know it's the right thing to do, even if the numbers don't kind of support them, or the number processing doesn't support them. So I've built into the calculators the kind of tools to be able to make that easy as possible to get the numbers despite the RICS. And I'll get my knuckles rapped for saying that, because all the right people were involved in those processes, but the end result isn't that helpful anyway. And Letty, I think it's Letty, published this new guide on where we have to go and what we have to do, and but we have to do this by such and such a date, and we've got to target these different building types with these levels of embodied energy, embodied carbon. Fantastic piece of work if only everybody was using it, and if only the regulations drove us towards it. And I've got to build all of their outputs into my calculators. And I've been through the process with the TM65 to build a mechanical and electrical carbon calculator as well. So I've got that information, and the calculator's not ready to publish yet. Just need a little bit more time developing it. But so we need easy access to easy information, and enable us to switch manufacturers, switch products, switch materials, and start using the right stuff, and to do it intuitively without having to do the calculations. So BRIAM, you spend days and days and days filling out spreadsheets to not change anything, just to report to BRIAM. And if we didn't have to do BRIAM, we could have done a greener building. So those kinds of comments come out from virtually every project. We were doing a project where somebody said, "Oh, we're not going to get any credits because we're doing it in timber. We've got to go to concrete." Oh, Jesus Christ, BRIAM is so bad at what it does. So anyway, I'm going off on another tangent.
No, your passion for it is admirable, and I think that it's good to surface these points and understand the nitty gritty of what is actually going on, because we're all caught up in the day to day of what we're doing. But we need people like you who are prepared to say it as it is, and to surface the real issues that are at play, and also as well, not just these are the issues, but also here is a resolution with your calculators, and the various resources and the lecturing that you're doing. And I think that's a very, very good and noble thing to be doing. Where can we find, for our listeners, Brian, where can we find these calculators and access to your resources?
Okay, so Green Building Encyclopedia is https Green Building Encyclopedia English spelling .uk, greenbuildingcalculator.uk. No wwws, just https, all of the other gobbledygook, and then greenbuildingcalculator.uk. The new build calculator is there. The retrofit calculator is 99% finished. I've just been given the opportunity to kind of refine it and tweak it whilst I'm doing the historic building calculator. And hopefully that can get up there. The transport emissions calculator, I could probably put that up quite quickly and easily. And then the glazing calculator is 90% there. They're coming quickly, hopefully, but they're available to download. They're downloadable at low cost. I've made it. Student price is £4.88. Big architectural practice £98.88. And there will be more and more functions built into them as I build more calculators for other people, and then I can feed them back into the other calculators. So they will get better as time goes on. It's just busy doing more bespoke calculators at the moment. And I had a website, I mean, it's still there, Green Building Learning, which was about CPD, and the lady that was working with me on that got COVID bad, so it didn't progress. So it's sort of in mothballs at the moment.
Well, there we are, guys. There are no excuses now. You've got access to this. It's readily available for extremely reasonable costs. There are no excuses. You've been told.
Yeah.
Brian, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing all of your knowledge, wisdom, and really helping us dissect the issues that are at play and how and doing it in a way that, you know, the layman, like for example me, can understand. I really appreciate that. Thank you, and thank you on behalf of our listeners.
Yeah, well, thank you for asking some good questions that got some good irritated answers.
Well, that's the main thing. It's you know, when you're doing these things, it's good to try and sort of poke at the passion of people, because that's where you get the real stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm glad I was able to do that today. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for that. Thank you for the opportunity, and keep on going. It sounds like a really, really good thing. I must have a look at your site to see some of the previous speakers as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian, and I'm sure we'll speak again soon.
Okay. Thanks ever so much. See you then, Jason. Bye-bye.